Determined to get the best present ever, a mischievous teenager decides to act like a good boy until Christmas and has to cover up a crime so that his parents don't give up on giving him a present. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Christmas, Cabin Fever, from 2023. Like most American teenagers, for Greg Heffley, Christmas is nothing more than a celebration where you get lots of presents. The big problem is that in order to receive a gift from Santa Claus, you need to be on your best behavior throughout the month of December. However, it's hard to be on your best behavior at this time of year, as there are plenty of opportunities to play tricks on your friends and family. Because of the mischief he's gotten up to in recent weeks, Greg is starting to worry about the quality of the presents he'll receive this Christmas, especially as the older you get, the worse the presents you receive. So this is the boy's last chance to win something he really wants, so he's willing to do whatever it takes to be the best son his parents could have. Christmas is just 2 weeks away and the neighbors are excited about the holiday preparations. All the houses in the neighborhood are exaggeratedly surrounded by lights and Christmas-themed decorations. At this time of year, Susan is extremely happy and excited and decides to follow the family tradition of putting up the tree while watching the Nutcracker show. Her eldest son, Rodrick, can't bear to listen to that song anymore, but Susan reveals that she grew up watching that show every Christmas. Seeing his mother happy, Greg takes the opportunity to talk about the new video game that has been launched, hoping to win it as a present. Susan then asks if the boy has behaved well over the last year. When he hears this question, Greg panics because he thought that being a good boy during the month of December would be enough to get him a good present. Suddenly, Frank appears with the ornaments he rescued from storage. Inside one of the boxes is a creepy doll that, according to Susan, was a very important part of her family's vacation tradition. The woman says that her grandmother knitted Elfrendo with a dash of Christmas magic. Since then, that doll has taken on the important mission of reporting to Santa Claus every time a child gets out of line. So Susan decides to leave it on the mantelpiece to make sure everyone behaves themselves at the end of the year. That afternoon, Rowley pays a visit to his friend and they both start building a snowman. The problem is that it's too cold outside and the boy suggests they go inside for hot chocolate. However, Greg is determined to stay well away from Elfrendo and asks if it would bother his friend to know that Santa Claus will be breaking into his room on Christmas Eve to drop off his present. Unlike Rowley, Greg doesn't like the idea of having to behave in an exemplary way to get something he wants and thinks it's a waste of time. While Rowley is trying to move the snowball, he accidentally destroys the lawn and Greg tries to cover the damage before Elfrendo sees what they've done. A few meters away, a guy is driving a truck responsible for scraping snow from the neighborhood when he spots a child in the middle of the street and stops the vehicle. When he approaches the boy to ask him to move to the sidewalk, he realizes that it's just a snowman and discovers that he has just fallen into a trap. Suddenly, a group of children come out of hiding and start throwing snowballs at the driver. While the man is being attacked, the giant snowball that Greg intended to use as a base for his doll starts rolling down the street and Rowley ends up being crushed trying to stop it. The sphere then goes rolling through the neighborhood and destroys the Christmas decorations. Seeing that avalanche approaching, the driver runs back to the truck, but ends up being hit. At that moment, the snowball stops rolling, but catches the vehicle and, as it tries to free itself, it loses part of the snowplow. Furious, the driver starts chasing Greg and Rowley and the pair have to flee to avoid being framed. While trying to escape, the two friends fall on a board and slip on the snow until they return to the road, where they are almost run over. Luckily, the man manages to stop the truck in time and, once again, the boys manage to escape. During their escape, they slip off a cliff and end up in the forest. So Greg suggests that they hide there for a few hours until that guy goes away. The boy's plan is to get rid of his clothes so that the driver won't be able to recognize them. So even though he's upset, Rowley decides to follow his friend's strategy and throws his clothes in a dumpster. Hours later, when he gets home, Greg finds his mother and Susan asks where the boy's cap and scarf are. It was Aunt Lydia who sewed those items for Greg and knitted his name on the inside of the hat. When he hears this, the boy panics and plans to get his things from the dumpster before anyone finds them. However, Susan informs him that they are about to go on a family outing and, much to Greg's chagrin, Elfrendo accompanies them. Along the way, the family passes the garbage can where Greg discarded his hat and he discovers that the garbage can is actually where people leave toys to be donated to needy children. From inside the vehicle, the boy sees some town hall employees handing out posters with the image of the vandals who destroyed the town hall snowplow. The next morning, Greg and Rowley remove the posters in an attempt to avoid being identified and Greg asks if he can sleep at his friend's house for a few days while he waits for the dust to settle. However, Rowley remembers that the boy has been forbidden to sleep in his house since he destroyed the kitchen while trying to make chocolate pudding. At that moment, Greg tells him that the box where they discarded their clothes wasn't a garbage can, and they both decide to go there to get their clothes back. So the pair arrange to meet the next morning, because that evening Greg has an appointment with his parents. While he and Manny assemble a house made of gingerbread, Frank prepares for a snowstorm that, according to the news, will arrive any minute. Suddenly, Rodrick appears with a poster in his hands and Greg is afraid that his parents will recognize him in the image. Luckily, Susan doesn't even suspect that her son is involved in the attack, but Rodrick is determined to find out who is responsible so that he can keep the reward. That evening, Susan plans to pack up the toys she has sorted to give to needy children and asks Greg to pick up the gift wrap. When he opens the cupboard, the boy finds the video game he so wanted to win for Christmas and is overjoyed, but decides to act as if nothing had happened. After helping his parents wrap up the toys, Greg goes to his room and starts imagining the moment when he has the video game in his hands. So he goes to sleep happy and, for a moment, forgets that he could end up in trouble if anyone finds out that he was responsible for destroying the truck used to clear the snow. The next day, instead of getting up at 6:30, as he had agreed with Rowley, Greg wakes up after 11 and discovers that there is a heavy snowstorm outside. According to the radio reports, the storm is set to continue until Christmas Eve, and the young man is beginning to worry about whether he will be able to get the clothes before the toys in the box are collected for donation. Worried, the boy decides to brave the storm and leave the house, but ends up being buried by a large amount of snow before he even manages to get out. So that night, after recovering from his cold, Greg calls his friend and they both try to come up with a new plan to avoid being caught. Since they can't leave the house until the storm has passed, Greg suggests that they stay hidden and keep their mouths shut so as not to arouse suspicion. At this point, the boy decides to tell him that his name is sewn into the inside of his hat and advises Rowley to play dumb if anyone comes to his house to ask him anything. At this point, Rowley can no longer cope with the guilt of what he has done and decides to call the police to turn himself in. However, at that time, all the lights in the city go out and the means of communication are interrupted. Without knowing when things will return to normal, Frank prepares for a state of emergency and begins to organize the supplies that will have to be distributed intelligently to last until the 24th. Unlike the rest of the family, Susan is grateful for the storm, as she will now be able to enjoy the vacations with her husband and children without any distractions. However, 3 days later, as there is no electricity in the city, the heating in the houses is not working, so even the best coats are not enough to keep out the cold. Even in the midst of the chaos, Susan tries to think of ways to keep her family entertained and proposes various games so that everyone can have fun, but the truth is that only she is having fun. At this point, Frank realizes that some canned goods have gone missing and goes to investigate his children to find out which of them is stealing supplies. Suddenly, Greg sees Elfrendo moving and Susan begins to suspect that her family is suffering from a collective outbreak because they've been stuck at home for so long. At that moment, the walls begin to creak and Frank is desperate to discover that the pipes in the house have burst, as the water has turned to ice. Quickly, the family rushes to the basement and discovers that everything is flooded. As his room has been flooded, Rodrick decides to camp out in his brother's room and claims that Greg has been acting very suspiciously lately. The boy then tells his theory and says that Greg and Rowley must have been playing in the snow when some high school students showed up and stole their winter clothes. They then trapped the pair inside a giant snowball and made them run over the snowplow. When he hears this story, Greg says that his brother is a long way from discovering the truth, but Rodrick says that there is a camera attached to the doorbell and, as soon as he has access to the images, he will find out what happened. As the days go by, Rodrick takes over his brother's room and Greg is kicked out of his quarters. Even without electricity, the young man continues to try to access the security camera images and Greg begins to despair when he realizes that he is about to be discovered. Less than 2 weeks have passed and the family has run out of food and water. So Frank has to destroy the gingerbread houses so that they can feed themselves. Frank doesn't understand how everything has gone so quickly, but Rodrick is worried about something else. The boy shows up with the gimmick he built to gain access to the recordings, but his plan is destroyed when his father takes all the potatoes he used and starts arguing with his wife, because he starts to believe that everyone is stealing supplies. During the fight, Manny disappears and everyone starts running around the house looking for him. The truth is that the youngest was eating hidden inside his closet and everyone discovers that this is where he hid the supplies he took. Furious, Frank ties the kid to a chair and everyone can enjoy their canned food again. To celebrate that family evening, Susan allows everyone to open a Christmas present and Greg is frustrated to discover that he has picked up a box containing a new scarf handmade by his Aunt Lydia. Just then, it stops snowing and the police car approaches the Heffley family home. When he discovers that the police are collecting donations of toys for needy children, Greg panics and soon begins to think that they will find his hat. If that happens, the boy believes that he and Rowley will be arrested and is completely terrified by the idea. So Greg says he's not feeling well and goes to his room, but the truth is that he's gathering all the objects he needs to sneak out and get his winter clothes before the cops find them. By this time, Rowley is already asleep and hears some snowballs hitting his bedroom window. The young man is frustrated to discover that it is not Santa Claus who is outside, but decides to join Greg on this new mission. After putting on his coats, Rowley climbs out of the window and follows Greg to the dump. Along the way, they have to hide from the police and, when they reach their destination, the pair start digging to find the box, as it has been buried by snow. When they finally find it, Greg asks his friend to hold his legs while he stretches to pick up the clothes. Just then, a vehicle approaches and Greg ends up falling into the dumpster. Terrified, Rowley decides to run away and leaves his friend alone behind. Then, after putting the pieces in his backpack, the boy realizes that this is the driver of the truck and is terrified. Luckily, the man doesn't recognize him and just asks what the boy is doing there alone on Christmas Eve. Immediately, Greg replies that he went there to clear the snow and make sure the police find the box of gifts to donate. The driver then reveals that he went there to do the job and thanks the boy for sparing him the trouble. The man then offers Greg a lift home and, while taking the boy home, asks him what he's getting for Christmas. Just then, Greg says that his mother has bought him a new video game and the driver reveals that his son has also asked for a video game as a present. However, he won't be able to give Tyler the present he'd like this year and will have to do a lot of extra work if he wants to buy the video game next year. When asked about the toys destined for charity, the man says that the police will distribute them that night and reveals that many families depend on those donations, including his own. When he arrives in front of his house, Greg says goodbye to the driver and, as he gets out of the vehicle, his hat falls off his backpack. At that moment, the man realizes that he is the boy who destroyed his snowplow, but he tries to act naturally and leaves after wishing Greg and his family a Merry Christmas. Just as the young man is about to enter his house, the city's electricity comes back on and all the lights in the neighborhood turn on in sync, illuminating everything around. At this point, Greg is relieved to see his family happy again and goes into the house to celebrate with them. However, when he sees his brother wearing the hat he had lost, Rodrick gathers the last bit of information he needs to conclude his theory and discovers that his brother is the guy on the wanted poster. Tired of lying, Greg decides to turn himself in and says that he was the one who damaged the town hall snowplow. The boy reveals that it was all an accident and happened when he and Rowley were trying to build a snowman. When they saw what they had done, the boys got scared and ran away. After hearing this, Susan and Frank realize that a car has stopped in front of their house and Greg begins to think that the driver has snatched him. Immediately, Rodrick asks his brother to run out the back door and says he will distract the police while Susan takes the boy away. Seeing his relatives desperate to get rid of the evidence that could be used to incriminate him, Greg decides to turn himself in and pay for his mistake. However, when the boy goes to talk to the police, Susan interrupts him and asks why he's there. The officers then reveal that they are going through the neighborhood to collect the toys intended for donation, since, thanks to the snowstorm, people were unable to go to the collection centers. Upon hearing this, the whole family is extremely relieved and Greg asks for a favor. Instead of keeping the video game his mother bought him, he decides to give it to Tyler as a present and asks the officers to deliver the device directly to the boy. That night, Greg finally manages to get rid of Elfrendo and throws him in the garbage can, but everything indicates that the doll will be back next Christmas. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you like the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.